If you've been going to the gym for months or even years and your body still barely changes, there is a good chance you've blamed the same thing most people do: genetics. Maybe you've even told yourself, some people are just built to gain muscle, and I am not one of them. But what if that explanation is wrong? Because according to exercise scientists, most people train consistently, but never fully trigger the biological signals required for muscle growth. Their muscles are adapting, just not in the way they expect. You've probably heard some of these ideas before. You need brutal workouts to grow. Protein shakes are the secret. Or some people just can't build muscle. But research shows muscle growth is not random. Instead, it's largely driven by a few specific psychological signals inside the muscle. So if the science behind hypertrophy is actually quite clear, why do so many people train hard and still fail to build muscle? In this video, we're going to break down the biggest myths about muscle growth and what scientific evidence suggests is the most reliable way to build muscle effectively. First of all, we need to address the explanation people blame first: genetics. When people struggle to gain muscle, genetics is usually the first thing they blame. And to be fair, genetics do matter. They influence things like muscle fiber composition, hormone levels, leverage, and even how quickly someone responds to training. Some people naturally build muscle faster than others. That part is true. But the difference is usually much smaller than people imagine. Most people assume that if they are not gaining muscle, they simply don't have the genetics for it. But research suggests the opposite. A large study examining resistance training adaptations across more than 280 individuals found substantial variability in how people responded to the same training program. Some participants gained more muscle and strength than others, but very few failed to improve altogether. This suggests that what sometimes looks like bad genetics may simply be a mismatch between the individual and the way they are training, and very few people ever come close to the true genetic potential. That requires years of proper training, nutrition, recovery, and consistency, because the body adapts to the stimulus it receives. If the stimulus is weak or inconsistent, progress will also be limited. One of the biggest myths in fitness is that building muscle simply means training harder, but fatigue is not the same thing as muscle growth. What matters much more is training volume, the total amount of effective work performed for a muscle group. For years, researchers have tried to understand how much volume is required for optimal hypertrophy. One of the most influential studies on this topic was a meta-analysis published in the Journal of Sports Sciences. The researchers analyzed multiple resistance training studies to see the relationship between weekly training volume and muscle growth. The results showed a very clear trend. Programs with higher weekly training volume produced significantly greater muscle growth. Routines performing around 10 or more sets per muscle group per week led to more hypertrophy than very low volume routines. This doesn't mean you need endless workouts, but it does suggest that many people simply aren't doing enough effective volume. If you scroll through fitness social media, it can feel like the entire process of building muscle comes down to one thing: protein shakes. Protein is definitely important. It provides the amino acids needed to repair and build muscle tissue. But the idea that more protein always equals more muscle is not supported by research. A large meta-analysis examined the effects of protein supplementation on resistance training adaptation. The researchers analyzed dozens of controlled trials involving hundreds of participants. Their conclusion was very clear: protein does support muscle growth, but only up to a certain point. The analysis found that muscle gains tend to plateau at around 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day. This is why many guidelines recommend roughly 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram for people who train regularly. Beyond that range, additional protein usually provides little extra benefit for hypertrophy. So for many people struggling to gain muscle, protein intake isn't actually the main limiting factor. The real limitation is often something else: whether the muscle is receiving a strong enough signal to grow in the first place. And that signal depends on a principle many people completely overlook. So let's cover it in the next point. One of the most fundamental principles of muscle growth is progressive overload. For a muscle to grow, it must be exposed to a stimulus that gradually increases over time. That increase can happen in several ways: lifting heavier weights, performing more repetitions, adding sets, or simply improving performance with the same load. All of these increase the demands placed on the muscle. One study highlights mechanical tension as one of the primary drivers of hypertrophy. Mechanical tension increases when muscles experience progressively heavier or more demanding loads. Without progressive overload, that tension eventually stops increasing. And when that happens, muscle growth slows down. This explains why many people plateau. They repeat the same exercise with the same weights for months or even years. From the perspective of the muscle, nothing new is happening. Tracking workouts can make a huge difference. If the weights, repetition, or total workload gradually increase over time, your muscles receive a stronger stimulus than before. And that stimulus is what keeps hypertrophy moving forward. Training provides the stimulus for growth, but the actual growth happens afterward, during recovery. This is when the body repairs damaged muscle fibers and increases their size and strength. That's why sleep is so important. In this research, the authors found that a single night of total sleep deprivation reduced muscle protein synthesis by 18%. It also increased cortisol levels and decreased testosterone, creating an environment less optimal for muscle recovery and growth. This shows that not enough sleep can impair the muscle's ability to respond to anabolic stimuli, such as protein and exercise. Chronic sleep restriction can also reduce training performance. Strength levels decrease, motivation drops, progressive overload becomes harder to maintain, which means recovery is not just about feeling rested. It's an essential part of the hypertrophy process. When you combine all this research, a clear pattern emerges. Muscle growth is not random, and it's rarely determined by genetics alone. Instead, hypertrophy tends to follow a predictable set of principles. First, muscles require sufficient training volume. Second, that stimulus must increase through progressive overload. Third, the body needs enough protein to support repair. Fourth, sleep and recovery allow the adaptation to occur. And finally, long-term consistency ties everything together. But there's one more piece most people overlook. Because you can train perfectly, hit your protein goals, and sleep 8 hours a night, and still struggle to grow. Why? Because muscle is not built out of thin air. It requires energy. The closest thing to a magic formula for gaining muscle is being in a caloric surplus. In simple terms, if your body doesn't have extra energy available, it has fewer resources to build new tissue. This idea is strongly supported in the scientific literature. This article concludes that creating a caloric surplus is commonly recommended to optimize muscle hypertrophy, since muscle growth is an energy-demanding process. Now, this doesn't mean you should eat everything in sight. More is not always better. A moderate surplus is usually enough to support growth without excessive fat gain. So if you remember one thing from this video, let it be this. Training is the stimulus. Protein is the material, but a caloric surplus is what makes muscle growth possible in the first place. So if you've ever felt like you can't simply build muscle, it might be worth reconsidering that assumption. The scientific evidence suggests that most people are not limited by genetics. They are limited by training structure, recovery, and consistency. Muscle growth is not magic. It's a biological adaptation to specific signals. Provide those signals consistently enough, and the body usually responds. The good news is that most of these variables are within your control, which means muscle growth is far more predictable than the fitness industry often makes it seem. And once you understand the science behind hypertrophy, you can start training in a way that actually works, because real progress rarely comes from dramatic changes. It usually comes from something much simpler, small changes constantly applied. That's how real results happen. If you are new here, Applied Human Lab is where science meets real results, because most people don't lack effort. They lack the right information. So if you want to stop guessing and start understanding, make sure you subscribe and stick around for the next videos. See you soon.